The constitutional law textbook hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, its worn pages splaying open like broken wings. Lorraine Washington watched her dreams scatter across the pristine lobby of the Regal Heights Hotel as Margaret Fisher, the head manager, towered over her with disgust written across her pale features. "This isn't Harvard, sweetheart," Margaret's voice cut through the afternoon air like ice. "Stop pretending you're something you're not." The other staff members froze mid-conversation, their eyes darting between Lorraine and Margaret like spectators at a tennis match. Someone snickered. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by their cleaning supplies. No one moved to help pick up the book that had become Lorraine's lifeline over the past 18 months. Lorraine's hands trembled as she knelt to gather the scattered pages. Chapter 7. Equal Protection Under the Law. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could recite every word of the 14th Amendment by heart, could explain the nuances of Brown v. Board of Education better than most law students. But here she was, on her knees in a hotel lobby, being humiliated for the crime of wanting more. "I was just reading during my break," Lorraine whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Margaret's laugh was sharp and cold. "Reading? You think carrying around fancy books makes you smart? You're here to clean toilets and change sheets, not play lawyer." She kicked at one of the loose pages with her designer heel. "Maybe if you spent less time with your nose in books and more time actually working, the presidential suite wouldn't have taken you 3 hours to clean yesterday." The words stung because they weren't entirely fair. Lorraine had taken longer in the presidential suite, but not because she was lazy. She'd been careful, meticulous, knowing that President Garrett Aldridge himself would be staying there tonight. Every surface had been polished to perfection, every detail attended to with the precision of someone who understood that excellence mattered, even in the smallest things. "I finished all my assigned rooms," Lorraine said, finally standing with her book clutched against her chest like armor. "And I stayed late to help Maria with the conference rooms." "Don't talk back to me." Margaret's voice rose, drawing more attention from the lobby. A few guests glanced over, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to obvious discomfort. "You're lucky to have this job at all. There are plenty of people who would be grateful for the opportunity." The familiar weight of her grandmother's words pressed against Lorraine's chest. "Education is the one thing they can't take away from you, baby girl." But standing here, feeling the collective stare of her co-workers and the guests, it felt like maybe they could take that too. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe she was fooling herself, thinking that a girl from Southeast D.C. who cleaned hotel rooms could ever become a constitutional lawyer. But then she thought about the case she'd been reading about during lunch, Miranda v. Arizona. How a single man's fight for his rights had changed the entire justice system, how the supposedly powerless could challenge the powerful and win. She straightened her shoulders. "I understand," Lorraine said quietly. "But I won't stop reading." Margaret's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "We'll see about that." She turned to address the other staff members who had gathered to watch the spectacle. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. We have standards here at the Regal Heights. We serve important people, senators, diplomats, business leaders. They don't want to see help that doesn't know their place." The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Lorraine caught fragments of their conversations as they passed. "Always thought she was too good for us. What did she expect? Should have minded her own business." Only Maria, the elderly housekeeper from El Salvador, paused beside Lorraine. "Mija," she whispered, "don't let her break your spirit. I see you studying every night in the break room. You're going somewhere she never will." As the afternoon wore on, Lorraine threw herself into her work with renewed determination. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, arranged every towel with military precision, and checked every room twice. The book remained in her locker, but its words echoed in her mind. "No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." By evening, the hotel had transformed into a fortress of activity. Secret Service agents moved through the corridors like ghosts in dark suits, their earpieces crackling with coded communications. President Aldridge had arrived an hour ago, and the entire staff had been briefed on protocol. Remain invisible, speak only when spoken to, and under no circumstances approach the president or his entourage. Lorraine was finishing her final round of the night, pushing her cleaning cart down the service corridor, when she heard voices from the main hallway. She recognized one immediately, the distinctive cadence of President Aldrich's voice, which she'd heard countless times on the news. He was walking with his chief of staff, discussing tomorrow's economic summit. The constitutional implications of the trade agreement are complex, the president was saying. We need to ensure we're not overstepping executive authority. The Commerce Clause has limits, despite what some of my predecessors believed. Lorraine found herself slowing, drawn to the intellectual discussion, despite knowing she should keep moving. This was exactly the kind of constitutional law question that fascinated her. She'd written a 20-page analysis of Commerce Clause jurisprudence just last month, working by candlelight when her electricity had been shut off. Sir, the chief of staff replied, the legal team believes we have solid precedent with the Wickard decision. Wickard was decided during wartime emergency powers, President Aldrich countered. The court's interpretation has evolved significantly since 1942. We need to consider the Rehnquist court's narrowing in cases like Lopez and Morrison. Lorraine's heart raced. She knew these cases intimately. She'd studied them, analyzed them, written hypothetical briefs on both sides. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot her place in the hotel hierarchy. She was just a mind engaged with ideas, with justice, with the beautiful complexity of constitutional interpretation. Lost in thought, she didn't notice when her cart hit an uneven floor tile. The cleaning supplies shifted, and her constitutional law textbook, the same one Margaret had humiliated her with hours earlier, tumbled from where she'd hidden it beneath the towels and crashed to the floor. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. The president and his entourage stopped immediately, Secret Service agents appearing from nowhere with their hands moving toward their weapons. In the sudden silence, Lorraine's book lay open on the polished marble, its pages spread wide, exposing her careful annotations and highlighted passages. President Aldrich looked down at the book, then up at Lorraine, who stood frozen beside her cart like a deer in headlights. She waited for the explosion, for the security detail to drag her away, for Margaret to appear and fire her on the spot. Instead, the president stepped closer to the book. His eyes scanned the open pages, taking in the careful margin notes, the color-coded highlighting system, the dog-eared corners that marked particularly important sections. He crouched down, his expensive suit creasing as he examined the text more closely. "Whose book is this?" he asked quietly. Lorraine's throat felt like sandpaper. "Mine, sir." The president looked up at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, noticing the hotel uniform, the cleaning cart, the rubber gloves hanging from her belt. "You're reading constitutional law, principles and policies?" The Kemerinsky text. "Yes, sir." Her voice was barely a whisper. He stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is graduate-level material, law school level. Are you in law school?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Lorraine felt the weight of every eye in the corridor, Secret Service agents, hotel staff who had appeared from nowhere, the president himself. This was her moment of truth. She could lie, minimize, make herself smaller to fit their expectations, or she could tell the truth and face whatever consequences came. "No, sir, I clean rooms here, but I want to be a constitutional lawyer someday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've been studying on my own for 2 years. I've read everything I can get my hands on. Supreme Court cases, law review articles, constitutional theory. I know I'm just a maid, but I understand this material. I really do." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. President Aldrich bent down again and picked up the book, handling it with the reverence of someone who understood its value. He flipped through several pages, his eyebrows rising as he took in the sophisticated analysis written in the margins. "Tell me about the Commerce Clause," he said suddenly. Lorraine blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Sir?" "The Commerce Clause. You heard my conversation with David about the trade agreement. What's your analysis of the current jurisprudential landscape?" The chief of staff shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. President, perhaps we should—" "No," the president's voice was firm. "I want to hear her thoughts." He looked back at Lorraine expectantly. Lorraine's mind raced. This was surreal, discussing constitutional law with the President of the United States in a hotel corridor while wearing a cleaning uniform. But the intellectual challenge overrode her fear. This was what she lived for, what she dreamed about during endless hours of scrubbing floors and changing sheets. "The Commerce Clause has been the battleground for federalism debates since the founding," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. After the expansive Warren Court era, the Rehnquist Court pulled back significantly with Lopez and Morrison, establishing clear limits on Congress's power to regulate non-economic activity. The Roberts Court has generally maintained those boundaries, though cases like Wright's show they're willing to defer to Congress when there's a clear economic nexus. The president's eyes lit up with something approaching delight. And how does that apply to international trade agreements? That's where it gets complicated, Lorraine continued, warming to the subject. Trade agreements implicate both the Commerce Clause and the president's foreign affairs power. The key question is whether the agreement requires implementing legislation that might exceed Congress's enumerated powers. If it does, then even the president's broad authority in foreign relations can't cure the constitutional defect. The chief of staff stared at her with undisguised amazement. Several Secret Service agents had relaxed their postures, apparently deciding that a hotel maid discussing constitutional theory posed no immediate threat to national security. President Aldridge nodded slowly. That's exactly the analysis our legal team provided. Actually, your articulation is clearer than theirs was. He paused, studying her face. What's your name? Lorraine Washington, sir. Well, Lorraine Washington, where did you go to school? The question hit like a physical blow. Here it was, the moment when her background would disqualify her from this magical intellectual exchange. I graduated from high school in Southeast D.C., sir. I couldn't afford college. I've been working here for 2 years, saving money and studying on my own. Something shifted in the president's expression. You taught yourself constitutional law well enough to engage in graduate-level analysis? Yes, sir. I spend every free moment reading. The library, online courses, anything I can find. My grandmother always said education was the one thing no one could take away from you. The president was quiet for a long moment, still holding her book. Then, he did something that would be replayed on news broadcasts for weeks to come. He extended his hand for a formal handshake. Ms. Washington, it's an honor to meet you. I haven't had a conversation about constitutional law this engaging in months. My Harvard law professors would be impressed. As they shook hands, Lorraine felt tears threatening. This man, the most powerful person in the country, was treating her not as a maid who'd overstepped her bounds, but as an intellectual equal. It was more validation than she'd received in her entire life. Sir, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think someone like me could really make it? Could really become a lawyer? President Aldridge looked at her for a long moment, then at the book in his other hand, then back at her face. Lorraine, I've met a lot of lawyers in my career. Most of them couldn't explain the Commerce Clause as clearly as you just did. Your circumstances don't define your potential. Your mind does. And you have a brilliant legal mind. He paused, seeming to come to a decision. Are you working tomorrow? Yes, sir. I'm scheduled for the morning shift. Cancel those plans. I want you to join me for breakfast. We're going to talk about your future. The corridor erupted in whispered conversations as the president and his entourage continued on their way. Lorraine stood alone beside her cleaning cart, her constitutional law book now back in her trembling hands, trying to process what had just happened. Margaret appeared around the corner, her face flushed with anger and confusion. What's going on here? Why were you talking to the president? You know the protocols? He asked me about constitutional law, Lorraine said simply. Margaret's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. He what? Don't be ridiculous. You're delusional if you think... He asked me about the Commerce Clause, Lorraine continued, her voice growing stronger. We discussed Supreme Court precedent and its application to international trade agreements. He said I have a brilliant legal mind. The color drained from Margaret's face. Around them, other staff members had gathered, their expressions ranging from shock to admiration. Maria was beaming with pride. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. You're just a maid. I'm a person, Lorraine replied quietly. A person who happens to clean rooms while studying law. But tomorrow, I'm having breakfast with the President of the United States to discuss my future. She walked away, leaving Margaret standing speechless in the corridor, and headed to the break room to call in sick for her morning shift. As she dialed, she could hear her grandmother's voice echoing across the years. Education is the one thing they can't take away from you, baby girl. The next morning, Lorraine sat across from President Aldridge in the hotel's private dining room, wearing her best dress and trying not to spill coffee on the white tablecloth. They talked for 2 hours about law, justice, opportunity, and dreams. By the end of breakfast, she had a full scholarship to Georgetown University Law Center, a paid internship with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and a promise that her constitutional law textbook, the same one Margaret had knocked in from her hands, would be displayed in the Oval Office as a reminder that brilliance can emerge from the most unexpected places. Margaret Fisher was terminated that afternoon for conduct unbecoming a Regal Heights employee. The official reason cited her treatment of staff, but everyone knew the real story. Word spread quickly through the hotel industry, and she found it difficult to secure another management position. 3 years later, Lorraine Washington graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown Law. President Aldridge attended her graduation ceremony, and in his remarks to the assembled families and graduates, he told the story of a young woman who refused to let circumstances define her destiny. He spoke about the danger of underestimating people based on their current situation rather than their potential, and the constitutional principle that all people are created equal, a principle he'd seen embodied in a hotel corridor by someone society had overlooked. Today, Lorraine Washington serves as a federal appellate judge, appointed by President Aldridge in his final year in office. Her chambers are decorated with photos from her journey, her grandmother's high school graduation portrait, her own law school diploma, and in a place of honor, a photograph of a worn constitutional law textbook with careful annotations in the margins. When law students visit her chambers, she always tells them the same thing her grandmother told her. Education is the one thing they can't take away from you, but she adds her own addition. And you never know who's watching when you refuse to give up on your dreams. The book that started it all, pages now carefully preserved and rebound, still sits in a place of honor in the Oval Office, a testament to the truth that brilliance doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers from the margins of a textbook, carried by someone the world has chosen not to see. Sometimes it takes a president to recognize what everyone else missed, that the most extraordinary people often come disguised as ordinary ones, waiting for someone to ask them the right question. And sometimes all it takes is refusing to let anyone else define who you're allowed to become.